Hello, welcome. My name is Pam Schools, and I'm the current student president of the Public Interest Law Organization here at S.J. Quinney College of Law. Thank you for joining us for today's panel discussion, Advocating for Innocence. I want to start by thanking our co-sponsors, the Rocky Mountain Innocence Center, the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office, and the Salt Lake County Bar Association. When you register, if you include your Bar Association number, you will automatically receive CLE credit. Otherwise, we'll post some information about how to obtain that credit later in the program. I'd like to also mention we're going to do a Q&A session. So please, at any point, you can click the button at the bottom of your screen and submit a question. I'd like to introduce you to our panel. We are humbled and honored here at PILO today to have with us three professionals who bring different perspectives to this important topic. First, we have Mr. Kirk Bloodsworth. Mr. Bloodsworth served honorably as a U.S. Marine before he was wrongly convicted and sentenced to death. He was the first person in the U.S. sentenced to death to be exonerated based on the testing of DNA evidence. Since his exoneration, he has worked endlessly advocating for wrongful conviction issues and currently serves as the executive director for Witness to Innocence. He has testified before Congress and multiple state legislatures on this issue, and 8 of those states have since abolished the death penalty. You will hear more about his personal journey and the work of Witness to Innocence. I'd also like to welcome Professor Jensey Anderson, who is a clinical professor here at S.J. Quinney College of Law, teaching both legal methods and innocence law. She's also the legal director of Rocky Mountain Innocence Center. That organization advocates for exoneration of wrongfully convicted individuals in Utah, Wyoming, and Nevada. And her efforts and that of her team have resulted in 7 exonerations to date. I'd also like to welcome Anna Rossi with the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office. Upon graduating from the Notre Dame Law School, she served as a prosecutor in the state of Illinois, including being appointed a special U.S. District Attorney role to prosecute federal offenses that occurred in her county. She served 7 years as a felony prosecutor before joining the Salt Lake County District Attorney's prosecution team, and also served here in Utah as a South Salt Lake City court justice. She's currently the Conviction Integrity Unit Chief, which is a new program here in the county, and she's going to talk more about it and its goals. Thank you, panelists. Welcome. I want to, in particular, thank you, Mr. Bloodsworth, for sharing your story, and I'd like to give you time to talk about your journey and also the work of Witness to Innocence.
Thank you, Pam and Jency and Anna and everybody here that's watching this telecast. My name is Kirk Bloodsworth. I'm 60 years old, but I remember back in 1984, when my life had just really started. I just got out of the service. I was in the Marines, as Pam had said. Honorably discharged out of the Marine Corps and went on about my life. My goal at that point was to be a commercial fisherman. And there was a fisherman in my family for over 200 years. My cousin is the last one to do it. And I never anticipated being that caught up in legal affairs or the trials or juries or anything like that. I had no idea. On July 25th, 1984, a little girl by the name of Dawn Venice Hamilton was found brutally murdered in a wooded area near her home. A search ensued for the killer. His description is as follows: 6'5", curly blonde hair, bushy mustache, tan skin, and skinny. That doesn't fit me one way or the other. It's my hair was as red as that U-Law sign we have here on this podcast. So I had sideburns down to here, a missing tooth in the front, and which was never, no witness. There was 5 identification witnesses in all positively identified me as the last person seen with Dawn Hamilton. However, that's one of the big leading causes of wrongful conviction in the United States is wrongful identification of suspects and so forth. Now, a search ensued for this killer. She was found 2:30 that afternoon on July 25th. That was one hot summer, as I remember it. She came up missing. She had some friends over the night before, according to testimony. They all got up in the morning, watched Facts of Life on television, and then after that show went off, they went outside to play hide and go seek, and Dawn was it. She had looked for and counted, like everybody said, and went out to look for her friends that spent the night over and couldn't find it. Went back up to the house at about 11:30 that morning and told her aunt that was watching her that day, my friends went in the woods, I can't find them. Her aunt suggested that she go down to the fence line near the wooded area and the pond and holler in the woods and tell them to come back up to the house. They weren't supposed to be in the woods. A half an hour later, the kids came back and Dawn did not. She was found lying face down in a pile of leaves and naked from the waist down. And she was, bludgeoned and they suggested and assaulted with a stick. That is what this honorably discharged Marine was charged with. And they were going to seek the death penalty in my case. And most of you think to yourselves in the instance that you think about that that person deserves to die. He did something like that. And, we can talk about that later, but you have to have the right person. I told these people from the day I was arrested till the moment I was released, I was an innocent man. I used to sign my correspondence that way. Respectively submitted, Kirk Bloodsworth, A period, I period, M period, which is an acronym for an innocent man. Now, like I said, I never had to get a lawyer for anything, but I think it's really necessary for me to tell you the first lawyer I had. Now, I want you guys to picture a prison visiting room with a glass partition, right? And your lawyer comes in off the street to an archway that's about 8 foot high, about 10 foot wide. He sits with his back to a brick wall. And the first thing out of his mouth, we had to talk through the glass on a telephone type of thing. And he said, the first thing out of his mouth, he says, Kirk, you're in a lot of trouble. I thought that was very astute of him right off the bat. But as we talked about the case, he kind of reassured me. He goes, Kirk, I know my way around the courtroom. I know my way around the criminal justice system. We're going to find our way out of here together. So we talked about 20 minutes about the case. One of only 3 visits he came to see me in the 8 months it took to send me to death. And right before he gets ready to leave, he reiterated what he said in the beginning. He said, Kirk, I know my way around the courtroom. We're going to find our way out of here together. And, picked up his briefcase, put his hand on the glass to say goodbye. He turned around and ran right into the wall. Yeah. That was my lawyer. Couldn't find his way out of the jail. It turned out that, I had gotten one of the most defense lawyer who has had ineffective claims against him from the very start. I mean, many. He's like the record holder in Maryland. I don't know if now, but he was at the time. Needless to say, he was right. I was in a lot of trouble. I went to a trial that lasted 2 weeks. All these people coming there and pointing to me and saying, that's the man. The prosecutor over in the side, they calling me a monster. Police officers and everybody coming to testify that I was the last person seen with Dawn, and that, I said a comment that I have something's terrible has happened, and I need to, my wife and I are not going to get back together for it. It was this famous omission. But they mean what they say when they say they can use anything you say against you. I was talking about my wife of only 3 or so months that I had promised a dinner. And, we were just having so many problems. And I was heading home to the only place I knew, to the Eastern Shore. Even the Supreme Court of Maryland said that I wasn't flighting. He just went home. There was no indication that, that they saw that I was in flight from my life or I was running away from something I had done, because it wasn't true. Now, in the early days of this thing, there was over 500 tips that came in on the Baltimore County Police Department tip line. And there was a call about me, actually 2 calls. Number 286, the person in the composite sketch looks like my neighbor Kirk. That's how this all started. They alerted the police came in. By the time that was, I had already left and went back to the shore, Eastern Shore, where I lived in Maryland. It's about 100 miles as the crow flies to Essex area where Dawn was ill. I'd only been there for 30 days. My wife had left the fisherman's life that I was working at the time, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, and a half a day on Sunday, after church. You're constantly working all summer until September, October the next year, and then you go into something else. The life, you can't, my wife was all by herself in a town that she had knew anybody, and she wanted to go home. So that's what we did. We put her on her bus and sent her home and said she could be with her family. As it turned out, I pined over her something fierce and went to Baltimore. I don't like calling it my mistake. I was just doing what every person in the country does at any given time when they're in love. And I hitchhiked up there with the clothes on my back and an old pair of discus shoes because I didn't have any tennies. And I remember, hitchhiking, getting a ride and everything, and different people give me a lift, and I finally get there. Worst mistake I ever made. My wife and I were, she was an earth sign, and she was a water sign, I was an earth sign. Together we made mud. And, that's an old Dangerfield joke, but it was true. I didn't like what was happening. There was like 7 or 8 people living in the house. So I decided to come home. In the meantime, Dawn Hamilton was murdered. It was all over the news. Every telephone pole and store that you went into had that picture and it's made by an identikit. And I think Anna would know, and the lawyers here would know what an identikit is. And of like 25 sets of eyes, 25 sets of noses, 25, beards and mustaches. And so they tried to get these 8 and 10-year-old boys who never identified me in the lineup that was held after I was arrested. And the police had called all the witnesses and told them not to watch television before the lineup was to be aired, be seen. Everybody in the Dawn Hamilton murder case watched the news and watched me being carried out. And ironically, the 2 little boys, the main witnesses, 8 and 10, Chris and Jackie, never identified me as a person. It wasn't until 2 weeks later their parents called the Baltimore County Police and said it was the children made a mistake. It was really number 6. I like how they can change all that, because I didn't really know that during the trial. I didn't know what was going up. I was told not to show any emotion and not to, react to anything, whether they called me a killer or not. But anybody knows me, I'm not that type of guy. If something's wrong, I'm going to speak up. But I listened to what the lawyer said, and I sat there unemotional, they said. So how do you get from emotional to unemotional? I would rather have been the other way. I sat through this trial and listened to the greatest amount of bull crap I ever heard in my life. There was nothing connecting me physically to the crime other than my 4-mile distance from where she was killed. I mean, I guess that's how far it was. It's about the crow fly. And it was only a mile from where I worked at this wicker warehouse. That day I was off. On July 25th, I was off. I was with 10 people all through that day. You know, there's a guy that wanted to sell a hunting rifle to somebody at the house, and I was there with them. We had that receipt from that. There was another fellow that I helped get a check cash over at a grocery store behind our house. It was one person right after another. And, you know, I even told them that I was out buying some marijuana at the time, and that the person that I bought it from came to testify on my behalf. And, you know, I was doing everything in my power to show them that I was an innocent man. And nobody listened to it. The judge at the time just spent his time by this is his back to me and looking at the ceiling lights in the courtroom. And I just didn't understand what I know this is probably a bad word, but the fix was in, at least for the universe. I tumbled against the worst possibilities of anything happen bad in a criminal trial happened to me. Well, after 2 weeks of all this, and you know, I testified on my own behalf. I had 2 different trials. I'll get to that in a little bit. But when the gavel came down on my life, the sentence was death and double life. The courtroom erupted in applause. Give him the gas and kill his ass. This is what they said. They partied till 3 o'clock in the morning for my execution. They were hooping and hollering. They did this in both trials that I had, and to no avail. There was something that they missed, and we all missed it in some kind of way, but I wasn't doing the investigation. A defendant shouldn't have to, it's bad enough that the trier of fact has to go through fallacies and everything else that the other side was saying about me, and calling me a monster and all these sort of things. I didn't have a snowball's chance in hell. Well, when the gavel came down, they sentenced me to death and sent me to a really notorious prison called the Maryland Penitentiary at 954 4th Street. And a guard had just been disemboweled by another inmate for a perceived insult. And I was going to this place branded a child killer. So you can all imagine what my life expectancy was supposed to be. Everybody was shocked when I went out in the yard, and I told anybody that would listen to me I was innocent. I just kept saying it. My mother knew who I was and what kind of person. And I'm not going to sit here and tell all of you one thing or another that's negative about my case. I did the best I had and with what I had, and it wasn't much. I told them the truth from the get-go, and the next thing I knew, I was sitting at 300-pound door. I can still hear that in my mind's eye. At 300-some-pound door slamming shut, and I'm walking in a cell that I can take 3 steps maybe, and touch the back wall, and touch either wall by just running my hands out like that. This was my life. Now, I became a prison librarian in this in the penitentiary. I was a prison librarian for 7.5 years. I read everything from Gestalt psychology to Stephen King. Nobody asked me what that Gestalt book's about because Sure. But quantum thinking or something. Does anybody know it's kind of education? But I came across this book written by Joseph Wrongful. Actually, it came to me in the mail, and it was about this new technology called deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. First time it's ever used. And my second trial lended me to the same people testified. The same hammer came down, gavel, and sentenced me to double life. They tried to sentence me to death, but the judge at the time wouldn't do it. And he said because of my youthful age, they were sending many people a lot younger than me to death row at the time in Maryland. As a matter of fact, out of 23 counties in the state of Maryland at the time, 21 of the death row convicts came from Baltimore County. And so, you can, person can see the writing on the wall there. They were really, anything that sort of qualified or just met the minimum requirements, they sought the death penalty for, because that's who they were. Now, after reading this book I was alluding to a while ago, I started remembering about DNA. The blooding was about these two murders that happened in Narborough, England. And a professor by the name of Alec Jeffries was asked to help, find this person with his new technology, genetic fingerprint. And he said, well, if the person's around, we can check if there's seminal fluid on either victim, and we can try to match it. The first victim, he got a thing, but it was in no databases that they knew of. This is a new cat, and they DNA tested the male population of the town of Narborough to try to find this guy. And then another murder happened, and the two semen samples were the same. This really intrigued me, because then I started remembering, by the way, they acquitted or exonerated a fellow that confessed, that falsely confessed to it because of this. He was the first one to be really exonerated behind genetic fingerprinting, if you want to know the truth. And I was just, I started remembering possible semen stain on underpants. It said swabs and slides, many spermatozoa seen, it said. So I wrote the prosecutor a letter. This was after my second trial. This was like 89 after I read the book. And I wrote her, I said, look, I want to take this new DNA test. It's called genetic fingerprinting. Let me do it. And so we can prove this once and for all. She wrote me back, a letter that said, Mr. Bloodsworth, we regret to inform you that the DNA has been inadvertently destroyed. I was devastated at this point. I didn't know what to do. I just destroyed. What did he destroy it for? We were still in PILO. My now lawyer, he was the chief judge of Washington, D.C. Superior Court. He's now retired, but it didn't make sense, because he told him to preserve the evidence in that second trial. They couldn't do nothing with it, and they had to keep it for for as long as he and the court agreed. So I had him go back and look for the evidence. I said, Bob, you got to go check. His name is Robert E. Morin, a wonderful man. I want you to think of Clark Kent when you think of him, because he was just really mild-mannered. And, I don't know how the judges ever heard him. He wasn't loud or gregarious like me. He was very, but he knew his stuff. He told me, he said, Kirk, I've already looked. He really knew his way around a courtroom, that guy. He said, but I've already looked. I can't find it. We don't know where it's at. And I said, well, you got to go back and check on it. I said, I'll keep calling you 100 times a day if you don't do it. and he knew I would. So I was sitting in my cell one day, and a guard put a Post-it note in my cell, and I was looking for it earlier. I wanted to show you. I've got it here somewhere, and so it's in my Bible or something, and I can't seem to find it. But anyway, it said, "Urgent, call your attorney, urgent." And I called Bob Moran again, probably a millionth time, collect. He accepted every one of my phone calls. And he was screaming. And for Bob to scream, it doesn't sound like you or I would scream from it. He was just, you could hear his excitement in his voice. And he said, "Kirk, you're innocent, man. You're innocent." I told him, "I knew that. Why don't you do the DNA? Let's get this straight." And so he went back. They were looking for the DNA evidence, and it turned out it was in the judge's closet in a paper bag in a cardboard box sitting in the floor. There was a half of one cell in all that evidence that excluded me as a depositor of the scene. Now, on June 28th, 1993, I stepped out of the Maryland Penitentiary a free man. I didn't go home in a police car. I went home in a limo. And, I just remember it as being so surreal. It's like, you're walking one day. It's like Alice in Wonderland. You remember that story? And she just like fell through that thing, and then all of a sudden she was home. That's how I felt. And I felt similar to that. And as it turned out, we wouldn't know the truth of this case for another 10 years. I was released. I got $300,000 measly from the state of Maryland at the time. And people could say that's not measly, but let me tell you, it should be $1 million a year from a person that's put on death row or sent to prison for something he didn't do. I got $300,000. I got a full pardon from the governor at the time. And, I was trying to really work back and forth. We wound up abolishing the death penalty in 2013, which I did in several states, one way or the other. It was either a constitutional barment or some other kind of thing or the legislature just said, we're not going to do it no more. I have a DNA law in my name called the Kirk Bloodsworth Post-Conviction DNA Testing Program. It gives monies to states to defray the cost of post-conviction testing, and we can give it to, it can be given to prosecutors as well as defense attorneys and the like, not just the innocent prosecutors. They can do it too. So I was really proud of that, and I can't remember, at the last tally, I think it was over 50 or 60 Bloodsworth exonerees.
That's awesome.
So, I'm gonna. I guess I'll end it there. I probably am over 1 minute. You believe that? It's I'm 1 minute good. So, I want to thank you all, and Jensey Anderson and Anna and Pam and everybody, all the Crystal Bagley and everybody for putting this on for me. And real quickly, this is my shirt right here. I want you to memorize this shirt, okay? And so it's Witness Innocence. Now it's backwards on there, but you can figure that out. And go there, witnessinnocence.org/donate, and because we're a nonprofit, and it helps exonerees to fight the death penalty, and also to help services for them. We have an emergency fund and so forth. So thank you all. And who gets it next, Pam? Or?
So we'll have Professor Jensey go next. I do want to say we have several questions for you, but we'll hold those to the end when we do the Q&A, Mr. Bloodsworth. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate hearing too how you honor the victim and that tragedy by mentioning her name and honoring her still to this day. That's also very moving. We appreciate that. Professor Jensey.
Good afternoon. I'm Jensey Anderson. I'm the legal director of the Rocky Mountain Innocence Center. And I just want to start by thanking Kirk for telling his story. I've heard it a number of times, and every time I hear it, it brings me to tears. You're an amazing survivor of wrongful conviction and an amazing advocate for the abolition of the death penalty. And I can't thank you enough for being here today. My job here today is to tell you about the work of the Rocky Mountain Innocence Center, which is the innocence project that serves Utah, Wyoming, and Nevada. The Innocence Movement really started in about 1992, when DNA really started to be something that people were using to, I mean, we always knew there were innocent people in prison, but what we wanted to do was to be able to prove that. And so in 1992, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld started a DNA innocence project at Cardozo Law School, and began the process of showing that people were innocent. And that movement started moving throughout the country. And by about 2000, there were 9 or 10 innocence projects around the country who were doing that kind of work. And at that point, a professor here at the law school, Lionel Frankel, looked at the work that was being done around the country and said, Utah and Wyoming and Nevada are really being ignored in that national movement. And what we need to do is establish an innocence project. So we got some students together and a board together, and I was privileged to be on that original board. And we established the Rocky Mountain Innocence Center and began our work to free the innocent. And one of the things that we learned during that process was that this innocence movement couldn't just be about DNA. Although people like Kirk and other exonerees had DNA in their cases, DNA only exists in about 5 to 10% of criminal cases. And so DNA couldn't be the panacea. It couldn't be all that this movement was about, that we really had to look at other ways to bring the innocent home from prison. And so we made the decision early on with the Rocky Mountain Innocence Center that we would work on both kinds of cases, that we would work on both DNA and non-DNA cases. And please understand, from the time that you take a DNA case until, the person walks out of prison and comes home can be anecdotally 2 to 4 years. And on a non-DNA case, it can be decades before you can really find the evidence that proves that the person is innocent. So the Rocky Mountain Innocence Center became, I think, the 10th innocence project in the country. We were a founding member of the National Innocence Network, which is a network of innocence projects around the country that now has 69 members around the world who work to free the innocent. And this movement, of course, is about bringing the innocents home from prison. But it's also, about that core value that we all share, which is that innocent people shouldn't be in prison. This is not a political issue. This is not a liberal or conservative issue. This is an issue about our country's criminal justice system. And as such, part of our work is also about examining the criminal justice system from top to bottom and figuring out not only how to bring the innocent home from prison, but how did they get there in the first place? Although we may have the greatest criminal justice system in the world, we're putting innocent people in prison. And Kurt is not alone as an exoneree. There have been 2,721 exonerations during the time that this movement's been in place, and 173 of those come from death row. And only 375 of those are DNA exonerations. Not only does this embody that core value, but it's a public safety imperative. If the wrong person's in prison, the right one, the person who did the crime may still be out in the community committing those crimes. So it's really, and the victim gets no justice if the wrong person is in prison. Dawn did not get justice until her real killer was discovered and put into prison. And so RMIC works in all of those areas. We fulfill our mission, which is to correct and to prevent wrongful convictions in Utah, Wyoming, and Nevada in really three ways. The first way, of course, is our casework to exonerate the innocent and bring them home from prison. The second way we do that is through policy, advocating on policy issues. And the third way is through education. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about each of those. Our casework is really the main focus of our work. We are a tiny organization, but we are a tenacious organization. We only have 3 paid staff, 2 attorneys, and our executive director, Jennifer Springer, is our managing attorney. Josie Hall is our staff attorney, and Blair Hodson is our executive director. We are wholly funded by private donations and grants. We receive no federal funding, no state funding. What we do is we get letters from prisoners, usually sometimes from attorneys and sometimes from family members, who tell us a story of innocence. We send them then a questionnaire that's about 25 pages long and ask for information on their case. That case goes through a screening process with our staff attorney or with another legally trained volunteer. Then it goes to a committee of our board of directors before it's accepted. And we only accept about 2% of the requests for assistance that we get, because we have to be very careful and very strict about our criteria. Once a case is accepted, we put it into an investigation stage where we investigate really from the crime forward to figure out what may have gone wrong in the case that would have landed an innocent person in prison. We look to see if there's DNA evidence available. We look to see what other, is there an alibi? Who might be the actual perpetrator? Is the timeline off? I mean, is there mistaken eyewitness ID? Is there flawed forensic science? Was there prosecutor or police misconduct? We look at all of that, and we do that through the help of students who are getting credit through a clinic that we run here at the University of Utah. And we do that through volunteers, and we do that through our tiny staff. And then once we believe that we have a case of innocence, and let me be clear, this has to be a case of innocence. It cannot be a case just where the attorney made a mistake or where evidence was withheld. It has to be a case of innocence. And if at any point during our investigation, we decide that either it isn't a case of innocence or that we cannot prove that it's innocence, we will, we will drop the case. But if we get to the point in the investigation that we truly believe we have an innocent client and it's time to take it back to court, then we bring on a cooperating attorney, and we have over 50 cooperating attorneys in Utah and Nevada and Wyoming who will then come onto the case pro bono and co-counsel with us as we move it through the litigation process. We do tend to get a lot of pushback from our opponents, which are either the AG's office or the district attorney's office that prosecuted the case. And then we take it through, hopefully, to exoneration. And we really don't give up until we have exhausted every channel to bring the innocent home. We do, as Pam said, have 7 exonerations and we have at this point 60 plus cases in investigation and litigation in our 3 jurisdictions. So that is the primary part of our work. But as I said, we also try to do some policy reform. We work to get our clients back into court. I mean, that's the first step. That's the first kind of policy that we had to work on. But then looking at the causes of wrongful conviction, and through these 2,700 plus exonerations where 25,000 years were lost, we've really been able to pinpoint some of the main causes of wrongful conviction, including mistaken eyewitness ID, unreliable forensic science, false testimony by snitch witnesses and others, official misconduct, false confessions. So we look at all of those, and what we've been able to do in our 3 jurisdictions is in all 3 jurisdictions, we've been able to pass legislation that allows individuals who have DNA, like Kirk, to come back into court to get that tested and to prove their innocence. We also sort of uniquely have been able to pass in our three jurisdictions statutory law that allows individuals who don't have DNA, but who may have other provable claims of innocence to get back into court. And not a lot of jurisdictions have that ability. You can get back into court through certain Supreme Court cases, but we've been able to pass what we call non-DNA or factual innocence statutes in our jurisdictions as well. In Utah, Nevada, we've also been able to pass compensation legislation to compensate those like Kirk who have spent time in prison as a wrongfully convicted person. There is never enough money. There's nothing that can make up that time for those individuals. But we're very proud of the legislation that we passed in Nevada just last year, which is really the best compensation statute in the country, and not only provides money for every year that an individual has been in prison, and more money for individuals who have spent time on death row, but also provides other kinds of services for reentry for those individuals. And so we're very proud of that legislation. There are about 30 jurisdictions now that have compensation legislation, and we're still working to do that in Wyoming. And we would certainly love to improve the Utah compensation legislation, but we have that. We've also been able to work on Eyewitness Id Reform. For Eyewitness Id is the leading cause of wrongful conviction in DNA exonerations. And so we've been able to help pass a rule of evidence in Utah, Rule 617, that provides really detailed instructions based on social science about how eyewitness ID should be treated in the courtroom. We've also been able to educate police departments in the major cities in both Utah and Nevada on eyewitness ID reform, and they have reformed their policies as a result. We've worked on death penalty repeal in all three of our states, and although we have not yet been successful, we're going to be, Kirk, I promise. We've also worked on recording of interrogations because false confessions are a cause of wrongful convictions in about a quarter of the wrongful convictions. And so making sure that confessions are recorded is from the beginning to the end is deeply important. And this year we're working on jailhouse snitch reform, particularly in Nevada. Unfortunately, jailhouse snitches are some of the most unreliable witnesses and the leading cause of wrongful conviction in death penalty cases. And so we've worked incredibly hard to look at reforms that can happen with that. So we work incredibly hard, not only on bringing people home, but also then on advocating for policy reforms. And then finally, we work on education. And as I said, we have a clinic at the University of Utah, S.J. Quinney College of Law. That's been in effect since 2007 and just recently became what we call an in-house clinic here. We're very humbled by the support that we've received from the University of Utah College of Law in establishing this clinical program. We take 10 students a year who work on our cases, who get incredibly invested in them. And very often when they move then into practice, they become one of our cooperating attorneys. And not only that, but they also learn how important it is to do pro bono work, and how important it is to look at criminal justice reform. And so we do that. We've also worked with students at BYU, and at other, we work currently with students at University of Wyoming who are looking at our Wyoming cases. And we have in the past worked with students at UNLV as well. So that educational piece is important. And then events like this one, where we can talk about our work, where we can, let you know about what we do, send you to our website to learn more about what we do and about our exonerees, encourage you to donate as we're a wholly self-sufficient nonprofit. And I also encourage you to look at Kurt's nonprofit. It's so important, the work that they're doing. And then finally, we have luckily been able to be involved in at least consulting, I guess, on the development of what are called either conviction review units or conviction integrity units. We have spoken we helped with the Clark County Conviction Review Unit that has seen one exoneration that we assisted them with. And we look so forward to working with the newly developed, and I say newly, it's I guess it's a year old by now, but Salt Lake County Conviction Review Unit. And we've just been contacted by Utah County to look at the possibility of establishing a conviction review unit there. And so, and we love to be joined in this work by the prosecutors. I think it's so important because of this core value. So at this point, I'm going to shush up. And I think I was pretty on time. And I'm going to turn it over to Anna Rossi, who is an incredible person and a prosecutor and also an advocate for the innocence as the chief of the conviction review unit at the Salt Lake County DA's office. And thank you all so much for being here.
Anna, thank you for taking some time to talk to us about this conviction integrity unit. I also just want to mention, we do recognize there are many good people working within the justice system, but we also realize that this particular issue happens more often than it should. And so we appreciate everyone's dedication to addressing this. Could you tell us about that unit?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Pam, and thank you for the introduction, Jensey, and for all of the help that you've given me in the past couple years, year and a half since we met, and to Kirk for being here. I've never heard Kirk's story before today, but it is the kind of story that is why we're doing what we're doing. It's the kind of story that we wish never happened. And we will keep working until it doesn't happen anymore, frankly. I don't know that there's any such thing as a perfect system, but the reason that we're all here is to work to get it as close as we can and to ensure that the Kirks of the world are few and far between as we go forward. As Pam introduced me earlier, I'm a career prosecutor. I've been a prosecutor since 2003. I moved to Utah in 2012, and like she said, took a 3-year break from about 2016 to 2019 to become a justice court judge in South Salt Lake, and returned to the DA's office in 2019. I wasn't kicked off the bench. I just wanted to go back. I missed advocating for people, and frankly, one of the most appealing things about coming back to the DA's office was that Sim Gill asked me to head our conviction integrity unit. It was newly formed. It was a baby unit. They were just getting it off the ground. And in my years out of the office and in the years leading up to my initial exit, I'd started to have some really serious conversations about criminal justice reform with a sibling of mine who has been employed by the ACLU for a very long time, and with friends and family members and professionals who brought to the front of my mind some major issues that we are dealing with on a regular basis in the criminal justice system. Through those conversations, I learned about conviction integrity units, and these units kind of came in on the coattails of the Innocence Movement, right? So if the Innocence Movement starts in 1992, at some point prosecutorial offices said, oh, we need to do something here to hold ourselves accountable and to make sure that we are letting the public know that we are holding ourselves accountable. And so these units start to form. And most of them, I think the first one, I'm going to just talk about the history of the concept for a little bit here. I think the first one was officially formed in 2007. There's a National Registry of Exonerations. It's kind of a joint project between UC Irvine, University of Michigan, and Michigan State. And they kind of keep track of these units as they develop and what kind of work they're doing. And so over the past, we're going on 13, 14 years now, there are 77 conviction integrity units that are officially listed on their register, which seems like maybe a good number, but it's really, when you think about it, only a couple in each state, 2 or 3 in each state. And I was checking some statistics the other day, and at last count, there were over 2,300 prosecutorial agencies in the United States. So of those agencies, only 77 have a conviction integrity unit formed. Of those 77, 34 have actually recorded an exoneration and 44 have not. And that includes Salt Lake County. We have not yet recorded an exoneration. But that kind of gives you an idea as to, even though there is a movement within prosecutorial agencies and on the prosecution side of things, it could be a lot more aggressive. There could be a lot more being done, especially, and I think most of these units are in larger counties where they have, the resources and the interest and the public support to form something like this. But in smaller counties and in more rural counties, it's just not there. And sometimes that's where it's needed most. So we need to start having conversations about that and how to kind of bulk these up and make more of them available out there. So like Jency said, our unit's been around for a couple of years. The Salt Lake County unit started in late fall of 2018. It may have even been November, December 2018. And at this point, we're the only one in the state. We're the only one in the state of Utah. Utah County, I think, has one on, they had one on record at some point, but the registry has since taken it off. I don't know if they weren't active, and if there's anybody from Utah County out here who can enlighten us, please do. But they're no longer on the registry. So the only one in the state is Salt Lake County's. And this has been a really important project for Sim and for Jeff Hall, who started it with him, who's one of our chief deputies, and for those of us who are involved in it. I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the unit and kind of the way that we review cases and how they come through, just to kind of educate everybody in that regard. Our unit the goal of it is to be transparent to the public and to let the public know what we're doing, how we're doing it, which cases are being reviewed, and what the results of those reviews are. So we have to be relatively selective with the cases that come into our unit as well, and which ones we send for review. So the way that we're set up is when somebody does file an application, and that can be a convicted person, that can be a relative, that can be an attorney. I review that application. I'm the unit chief. So I review the application to make sure that it meets our initial criteria, which are that it was a felony case out of Salt Lake County, prosecuted by the DA's office, that the direct appeals have been completed, and that there is some sort of credible and verifiable claim that the conviction or sentence lacks integrity. So we are not just reviewing innocence claims. We're reviewing anything that could show that the person shouldn't have been convicted in the first place, or if they were, that their sentence was an error or shouldn't have been what it was, if there was a bad aggravating factor or something like that that we need to review that could make a difference in the outcome of that person's case. So I review those applications as they come in, and if they meet those criteria, I forward it to an independent committee of 5 people who have applied or been chosen, or a combination of the two, to the office to participate on this independent panel to review and conduct any investigation. And then when the investigation is complete, write a report, send a recommendation to Sim, and then he reviews it to see if any action is going to be taken. So right now, and none of those independent people, I say they're independent, so they're obviously not working in our office, but right now that panel consists of Christine Durham, one of our former chief justices on the Supreme Court, Judge Judith Atherton, who is a former 3rd District judge, Gil Affey, who is a longtime defense attorney in town. Probably everybody on the call knows who Gil is. And David Schwindeman, who was a longtime U.S. attorney here in Utah and frankly all over the world. And Michelle Loveday, who is a diversity coordinator for the Jordan School District, is kind of our community member. So what happens when they receive these reports or these applications from me is that they take the case. I give them everything we have. If we still have a file, I give them transcripts and reports and everything that we have to review. If there's anything that they feel they're missing and need to supplement, they will have an investigator. They'll send a request to an investigator to go gather that information for them. And when they have everything that they need, they will send, like I said, a report with a recommendation to Sim to review. Thus far, we have not had many applications sent to our office, which, I guess you could say, oh, good, that means not many people out there are actually innocent and need you to review their cases. But I don't think that's the issue. I think that the issue is that people just haven't heard about us. And because the unit is relatively new, and it's not like I have the ability, especially right now, to go to the prisons and say, hey, everyone, we have this unit, send us your applications, which is actually something that I was planning on starting, and then COVID hit, and now I haven't been able to do it. But I've been in contact with attorneys at the prisons who help inmates with their filings and their court pleadings and things like that, to let them know that we're here. And we're just trying to get the word out to people who need us, that we're here and that they can submit those applications. But thus far, I think we've probably had about 15 applications total sent in, and we've only done one full review. Because like Jency said with the Innocence Project, if at any point, if they meet those initial criteria, but at some point we realize that there's nothing that we're going to be able to verify or something falls apart, then we will stop the review as well. So we've had one full review done. The committee recommended that no action be taken on the person's case. So no action was taken, the conviction remained as is, the sentence remained intact. But I'm hoping that, over the next few months, I think that we have a few that are in line to get that full review. In fact, we just had one, we had a meeting yesterday, and the committee has accepted another case. So they're going to start review on that one. But there are some challenges in the process, right? And I want to kind of touch on a couple of those. And I don't know how much time I have left. I think just a few minutes. So I want to talk about those challenges a little bit before I turn it back over for the Q&A. But like I said, one of those challenges that we do have is contact with the community and letting people know that we're here. And, our application is on the district attorney's website. So if anybody, and I know that Gency will refer people to us when they're not able to take them from the Innocence Center. So we get referrals from there. But if there are any attorneys out there in the audience or anyone who knows someone who might be interested in this, our application is on the website and it can be filled out and sent in. We also have a challenge in the types of cases that we're going to review because we are new and we're still kind of developing our policies and procedures as we go on. The initial plan was just to review convictions, and then all these things start coming up, where we're like, well, maybe this thing actually happened, but we need to review a competency issue that wasn't reviewed when it should have been. Or maybe we need to review, we just had somebody say, I was wrongfully convicted as a juvenile. I was convicted as an adult. I was actually a juvenile in the system. And now I have an illegal reentry charge pending in federal court based on this conviction that I had back then. And that's something that we hadn't considered may be an issue. So we need to review that. So we have to talk about how to shore up those policies and procedures. We have a resource issue. The government agencies, as with nonprofits, always have resource issues. So we need more people. We need more investigators. We need more everything as we get bigger and go forward. And the Innocence Center has actually been helpful in that regard because Blair Hodson sent me a grant application the other day that I think we're going to fill out for federal grant money to provide us with the resources that we need to devote someone to this full time. I have other jobs in the office as well and a caseload. And so I do this as part of my job, but it would be great to devote somebody to it full time. And then finally, the other challenge that we have is coming into compliance with best practices. And this is where Jency and her crew have been, or I'm sorry, Professor Anderson and her crew have been extremely helpful to me in the conversations that we've had about what a conviction integrity unit should look like. Like I said, I'm a career prosecutor with a passion for this work, but best practices say that, maybe you should have somebody with a defense background that takes that role, that comes into the office and takes that role. Maybe you should have somebody who doesn't work with the prosecutors who are in the office and are friends with them. And we're impartial and we do everything we can be to be impartial, but there are certain things that when you look at the technical best practices, it would be great to be able to have the resources to come into compliance with those. And so those are conversations that Sim and I are having all the time about what we can do to make this better, to make it work as well as it can. And so with the cooperation from the Innocence Center and everyone else out there that is interested in this work, we're able to do that. And it's a work in progress and it will be for years. But we are committed to it. Sim is very committed to it, and we will do everything we can to do the best that we can for this area of the law. It's a really important thing to talk about and to work on. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. We do have a number of questions, and Anna, it sounds like you touched on it, but I want to make sure. Have you yet received any requests from any inmates in Utah who are on death row? Or perhaps Professor Jency, have you had more work around death row inmates in Utah?
I have not received one. I should say the unit has never received one from a death row inmate in Utah of the applications that we've received so far.
We have one case on death row. Currently, it's currently in a different posture right now. And so there's DNA evidence to be tested in that case, but it's in a posture right now of looking at what's called a Brady claim, which is the withholding of exculpatory evidence. And so the attorneys working on that claim want to get through that claim before we move forward, because it may mean that the client gets a new trial. And if that's the case, then DNA testing can be done at that time.
Okay. Kirk, we had someone ask whether your second attorney, who was able to obtain your exoneration, were they working with an Innocence Project at the time?
And the Innocent Project never existed in 1992. That's when we really started, well, 89. It didn't get started until about a year later. I mean, I talked to Barry Sheck on the phone. He helped us find who the DNA guy was. There's only 2 people in the United States that did that. I'm trying to think, you think I would remember that guy's name, but it's Forensic Science Associates, Edward Blake in California. And they're the other fellow, which I cannot remember his name, they're the ones that did the FBI's lab. So no, but it all started from there. I remember talking to him, Barry Sheck, on the phone, and the guys wouldn't believe me. I said, guess who I was on the phone with? No, they didn't want to believe it.
Well,
They believe it now, though.
Yes. You mentioned that your faith was part of the process for you as you went through this. And did you want to share anything more particular about how your faith carried you through those difficult years? Because you were incarcerated for 9 years, if I remember correctly.
8 years, 10 months, and 19 days. God is good. In a lot of ways, I turned to Catholicism when I was in prison, so I'm a Catholic these days. And but I believe in God, and I as we all know, whatever we ask the Lord for something, it doesn't come the same way we want. I figured if I could prove who killed Dawn Hamilton, I could solve it all, which was true, but it just happened. Took 19 years from the beginning into the end. And, it was a lot of good people, but my faith was shaken right to the ground. I would get tired, but I would get up and I would just go, okay, Lord, here we go. And I wouldn't tell you that I'm a Bible thumper, but I tap on it all the time.
I imagine so. Professor Anderson, Jensey Anderson, one of the questions we have is, do you have any advice for S.J. Quinney and other law students who want to pursue being an advocate for innocence as their career?
Yeah, there are 69 innocence organizations around the country. Some of them are housed in law schools. Others, like us, are independent, nonprofit organizations. And so, getting into that world of innocence may take some time, as most of us who do it are so deeply passionate about it that we don't move on very quickly. But certainly as a law student, I think taking the Innocence Clinic, if there's an Innocence Clinic available at your school, which there is here at the U, to try to do that, to begin to learn about the causes of wrongful conviction and post-conviction litigation and how difficult it can be. Also, if you're working, and that's for both prosecutors and defenders, as a prosecutor, it's so important for prosecutors to understand that. And now that there are conviction review units or conviction integrity units popping up in these places, you can also, go that route. But generally, innocence people come from the defense community, and learning about criminal defense and becoming an excellent criminal defense lawyer and understanding how an innocent person could be convicted and how a guilty one is convicted as well, I think is really an important step in that direction. And if you're unable to practice innocence law right out of law school, to continue either prosecution or defense, to be in the criminal world and to understand it, either as a line prosecutor or a defender, an appellate attorney, an AG who works in criminal law, so that you really get a sense of the criminal justice system. Because these cases, once they go back to court as an innocence case, are actually civil cases. But having that background in criminal law is really invaluable as you move forward in this work.
I imagine so. And
Can I add something to that? I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I know that question was not for me, but I just want to say that, like Jensey said, this is important for prosecutors as well. And if you are a person who is interested in this work, there's no better place than to be a prosecutor and to come into these offices and to work to ensure that innocence is done in the first place, rather than trying to fix it afterward. I just had a friend who left LDA here who was one of the most passionate defense attorneys I've ever known, and she was looking for a new job. And I said, why don't you apply to our prosecutor's office? Because you're the kind of person that we need in there. So we have wonderful prosecutors all over the country who care so much about justice, but innocence work, it can start at the very beginning. It doesn't have to be an after the fact thing. So just consider that too.
That's a very valid point. And actually it ties to a question that we have for you as well, Anna. As you had a role as a judge at one point, and obviously you've worked quite a bit with judges over the years, do you think this innocence work needs to exist primarily in the defense and prosecution arena, or is there a role in the judiciary as well?
That is a very tough question, because I think when we talk about innocence, we talk about advocacy, and judges are not allowed to advocate, right? They have to remain impartial, and they have to not take a position one way or another aside from this is what the law says I need to do, which is one of the hardest things that I faced, even just in a misdemeanor court, was having to not say anything and just, follow the law and let things happen as they happen. I think that there is a place for judges to stop things if they think that they are going too far, but they're in a really tricky position as far as their ethical obligations go. So I don't know that there's a place for them other than the place that they already have, which is just to do the best they can with the law that they're given to follow.
For another panel one day, I'd love to do a discussion on mandatory sentencing and its role in this issue as well. I also want to mention Taylor Hartley shared with us that he is a defense attorney who is working with Utah County on a conviction integrity unit case. And so they are alive and well, which is awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Taylor. Mr. Bloodsworth, have you had the opportunity to talk with either the neighbor who linked you to the drawing or any of the witnesses that were there? And do you even have a desire to?
Well, when cases go wrong, they just go wrong for one reason or another. People try to be conscientious when they make witness identifications. I've heard of people who tried to identify the sniper. Remember back in the day when that sniper was running around? They tried to identify this sniper at a McDonald's that was 400 miles away, 20 minutes after he shot somebody in DC area. So, people were conscientious and, thinking of a prosecutor that would go or it's a mixed feeling with me on a lot of it, but, I think it's in the moment. Things happen so fast. Back to that, to use that as an example, they never knew it was a blue Caprice for weeks until they found out it wasn't. And, we were all looking for a white van. How many white vans did you all see in your mind? We have to really make sure when we put the hammer down on somebody that it's not, what was it? I'm trying to think of it. Marilyn Mosby. I did at the at Witness Innocence, we have a program that is accuracy and justice, where we have 3 exonerees with one attorney being the mediator. And, Marilyn Mosby said it really well. It's not about convictions, it's about justice. And so that's what I'm talking about. I don't want to see a person that can kill a child and running around. but let's get it right. Let's not just say, oh, we're so scared somebody else is going to get hurt. That's exactly what happened. This person, they had a police report about this guy. They never went back to check. They never went back to check him. That was 8 days before I was arrested.
I appreciate hearing that. It's very difficult to know that those are the types of things that happen in some of these cases. It really is very unsettling to the soul. And one of the questions that was asked was, do you need volunteers that have substantial criminal law experience in order to be involved either with your program or Professor Jensey's program? And also, Gage Hansen mentioned that Salt Lake City is currently looking for several prosecutors who would like to be involved in a prosecution integrity unit there. So if anyone's interested.
Oh, wow. I'm sad that I didn't know that, because we are affiliated with Salt Lake City's prosecutor's office so closely. So I was not aware of that. That's really great news.
And so do you really need a strong criminal background to be involved, or are there roles that can be served by everyone?
No, and Gency can probably answer this better than I do, especially working with students so closely, but you don't need a strong criminal background. The conversation that I had with our panel yesterday about our latest case that's coming up for review, they said, oh, we need to get some law clerks. Are you guys going to be able to get some law clerks? And we are back in the office, with budget issues last year, there was some changes, but we're getting law clerks back in the office, and assuming they have zero criminal background, we're going to put them right to work. So you don't need a background.
Yeah, and let me say this, we take all kinds of volunteers. It's certainly been difficult during the pandemic to have, because we haven't been in the office as much, we're working from home. And so training volunteers and finding work for them has been difficult. But I think as the world gets back to normal, we have had undergraduate volunteers who, and sometimes the work is, scanning documents. Sometimes the work is reading trial transcripts. So, we have all kinds of works for all kinds of people. And in fact, when we do bring on cooperating attorneys, we actually prefer attorneys who have a civil background to those who have a criminal background, because these are civil cases. So we go through civil discovery, we take depositions, we, do interrogatories and those kinds of things that those of us who have criminal law backgrounds don't have a lot of experience in. So no, it's not required. The only reason I said that was for someone who wanted to go into it as a career. I think that's a strong background to have. But I think for volunteers, as I said, we're a tiny organization with 3 staff members. And so we welcome volunteers with open arms, those with or without legal or criminal law background.
That's excellent. We have had people ask, for instance, about paralegals. So it's good to hear that everyone's welcome and has a role to fill. Professor Jensey, specifically within RMIC, what is the work you're doing on this, the jail snitch reform legislation?
We're working with our national office. That's one of jailhouse snitches, as I said, is one of the leading causes of wrongful conviction, and it is the leading cause of wrongful conviction in death penalty cases. And what I'm talking about is that, jailhouse person who's in the jail and claims to have been with the defendant and claims that they confessed to them. And there's all kinds of evidence out there that, first of all, there are a lot of these people who are what we call serial jailhouse snitches, who know how to do it, who know how to get the information. So the reform that we're working on is sort of multifold. And as I said, we're working on it with our national office. But the first thing that we want is that the jailhouse snitch, there has to be corroborating evidence before a jailhouse snitch can even testify, so that the judge can hold a hearing prior to the time a jury would ever hear a snitch, where corroborating evidence is presented. And if there is no corroborating evidence, then the snitch does not testify. And that doesn't mean that the snitch has information about the crime that nobody else could have. I mean, that means that there has to be things with physical evidence and or witness testimony from more reliable witnesses, because snitch testimony is inherently unreliable. So really, it focuses mostly on that corroborating evidence and the ability to deny a jailhouse snitch the ability to testify if there is not corroboration.
Thank you. One of the questions that has been raised, Mr. Bloodsworth, was What is it that what advice do you have for law students who are about to become lawyers? What would you like them to know so that they can be good lawyers and do a better representation than you experienced?
First of all, you have to look at the evidence that you have. And you're not going out to seek, you do that later, but don't turn a corner or be on a down low on something. Study it. So, you have to almost just dissect this thing and be honest with yourself. I mean, if it's a red herring, it turns out to be a red herring, but follow up on it. Don't have a police report about another suspect and then you don't go check. That's not the way to do it. And also, I think for Anna and prosecutors in this kind of situation, they've got to be able to prove beyond not a shadow of a doubt, beyond reasonable doubt, and make sure that reasonable standard is right. But don't listen to what one side or another says. You go find the truth, and if you got it, stick with it. Don't give in to if you can prove something, it's the story. And if that person wasn't there, you got proof on it, you got to put that forward. And exculpatory evidence is very fragile to start with if you don't go back and find a person in the beginning or persons or whatever you're trying to look for that has to go to your defendant, your client, and make sure that you represent them with all zeal and don't, I'm not telling you to, the first thing for me to come out of my mouth is not to tell you to do something wrong. Doing the right thing is never wrong. So that's how you have to look at it and keep going.
Thank you. I'm really proud as someone who will be graduating soon.
Don't give Anna a chance to do that.
Anna, one of the things that was asked is, do you find there are any difficulties presented by running a conviction integrity unit within the context of the DA's office? You touched on, you're working on best practices, but for instance, do any of the attorneys ever struggle to switch tracks from a prosecution standpoint to an exoneration standpoint?
I have not had any, and the main reason is that I'm the only attorney in the office that's involved with the unit. I do that initial review and then send it out to the independent panel. So I'm not asking other attorneys who are actively prosecuting cases to help me in this effort. The other reason is, at this point, I have not yet gotten an application on a case that involves a prosecutor that currently works in our office. So they're all older and, prosecutors that were there before and are now gone. However, we did build into our new policies and procedures an internal policy that if one does come in and the prosecutor is active in the office, that we inform them of the investigation and the review, and there's an order that there will be a strict wall between me and that prosecutor as far as that case goes. No communication with anybody about the review. That they are left out of it unless and until the panel needs to speak with them about something. So we're taking steps and making efforts to ensure that never becomes an issue, but it just hasn't out of circumstance yet, especially. So.
Okay. Well, and the interplay between Rocky Mountain Innocence Center and, for instance, the integrity unit, should someone seek one before the other? Do you guys handle these simultaneously? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we each get our requests for assistance. And I think as we've talked about potentially sharing that information. I believe on Anna's, I'm sorry, I'll just call you Anna and you just call me Jensey and it'll be great. That they ask if they've ever asked for assistance from the Innocence Center, which will also help them understand whether because we don't want to duplicate efforts. And in many jurisdictions, and quite frankly, I think not too long from now in this one, Innocence projects will bring cases to the Conviction Integrity Unit where they've already been investigated and bring them to them and say, we think this is a case you really need to look at. And here's the investigation that we've done, and here's the witness interviews that we have, and here's who you need to talk to, and here's all the paperwork, and will you please take a look at it? That's actually how we worked with the Clark County District Attorney's Conviction Review Unit, and how we joined hands in their first exoneration. And so our plan is to work together. And I think working together on some cases is going to be great. And I can't wait for a time when we can work with Anna, and I think in her unit, and I think, and the independent panel. And I think that may be coming down the line soon. We do work in 3 jurisdictions. So certainly some of our cases come out of Salt Lake County, but not all of them. So we can't work on all of them, together, but there are certainly a couple that we're deciding about when to bring it to Anna. So we're on our way.
Excellent.
And we look forward to that happening, because it has been, like I said, Jensey and Jennifer have been so helpful in everything in developing our unit. And we don't want to duplicate efforts. And the more heads we have in the game and the more resources we have to share, the better, in my personal opinion. So I look forward to hearing from you guys on whatever you've got.
Ms. Rossi, one of the questions we have is, what advice do you have for people who are seeking a review by the Integrity Unit if they're from another county? Is there any ability to do that?
So we haven't actually, I haven't received any requests yet from anybody in a jurisdiction that doesn't have a resource available. So when I get them from outside jurisdictions, I'll see where they're coming from. Most of the time they've been from out of state, and say, here's your local Innocence Center, here's your local Conviction Integrity Unit contact, so please contact them. We have not yet been faced with a situation where we're being asked from another county in Utah to review their case because whatever county doesn't have a Conviction Integrity Unit. So I'm not sure what would happen there. It might be something that we need to look into expanding, but I don't know what our legislation, there's recently developed legislation, their internal policies. I'm not sure if that would prevent us from doing so. So that'd be something we need to look into.
Okay. So I assume a defense attorney, for instance, might want to reach out to you to have that discussion offline to see if there's something that can be.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for your time today. This is a really powerful discussion, and I'm hoping it's going a long way to educate, not just locally, but nationally as well, on this really critical issue. Mr. Bloodsworth, thank you so much for your dedication to this cause. I know you've been involved in many advocacy initiatives since you were exonerated. We didn't get a chance to touch on those, but I want to thank you for that dedication to that effort. And as always, Professor Jensey and Ms. Rossi, thank you for your dedication, because we need it from all sides of this equation. Have a good day, everyone.